YouTube. Today in the Naughty Librarian, I am going over my Black History Month book recommendations. February is Black History Month, and personally I find it very important to read diversely and read books from authors who have very different backgrounds than I do because it's important. So if you're looking for a recommendation by an author of color to celebrate Black History Month with, these are some of my favorites that I have read and really enjoyed, so I just want to share them with you guys. First recommendation, Rebel by Beverly Jenkins. This takes place in New Orleans in the Restoration era, so right in the aftermath of the Civil War. New Orleans is very tense, and it is following this woman named Valinda. She comes from up north, and she comes down to New Orleans because she wants to be able to teach the newly freed slaves how to read, how to write, how to do math. She wants to teach them so they can, better their lives. And then you have Drake, who is basically like sex on a stick. I kind of picture him like the guy who played M'Baku in Black Panther. So picture that, and he's a literal blacksmith just with steam around him all day. Like it works on like a variety of levels. He comes from a well-to-do family in New Orleans. He kind of takes care of all of like the freed slaves, and in particular Valinda, he comes across her. She almost gets murdered like right away in the book. He saves her, and like they kind of form this bond and this relationship. And, obviously they're going to get together in the end, and it's really, really, really good. And also, it's very historically accurate. Beverly Jenkins does write these books that have a lot of actual history in them. This has a lot of things you don't really read about in a lot of history books, but are real events that actually happened in this era in New Orleans. So she just puts like a romance on top of like real history. So it's kind of like edutainment. It's educational and it's entertaining because there's also smutty delights. So I really recommend this one. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was really, really good. Also, I have to recommend A Prince on Paper by Alyssa Cole. This one is a delightful rom-com. It is fake dating, which is my jam. This is with Naya and Johan. And Naya is basically, for nomenclature's sake, she's an African princess. Not necessarily a real princess, but she's a princess. So she's an African princess, and Johan is a prince on paper. He was the adopted son, like a stepson to the king of a small country in Europe. And they kind of know each other through their families, and they end up fake dating because she wants to be thought of as an adult woman, and he wants to be thought of as not the bad boy. And, they fall in love for real. But also it goes into a lot of other issues too. They deal with gender identity and someone wanting to be referred to as they instead of he or she. And they also deal with toxic masculinity. And also they throw in a dash of colonialism. Basically, the country Johan is from, I can't remember the name of it right now, but they were colonists to this African nation. Mind you, these are all fictional places, so I'm not remembering the names of them right now, but they were colonists. So it's kind of a tense political structure because they're obviously no longer colonists at this modern day era, but there is a past there. So it's an interesting dynamic, and she puts in a whole bunch of different stuff going on in here besides just a lovely, fun, fake dating rom-com. There's also a lot of other things going on here that are important issues. So I really, really like this one. It's fairly short and she gets a lot of stuff in it. It's really fun and really good. And Johan is kind of like the devil-may-care, rakish type of character. Naya is very much a sheltered princess, and I love it. I live for it. Give it all to me. So I definitely recommend this one. It's really fun. I also want to recommend The Wedding Party by Jasmine Guillory. I'll be honest, this one isn't my favorite book of all my recommendations. It's still good. I enjoyed it. I do feel like perhaps it might be a little overhyped. But the other side of the coin is that I have the very unpopular opinion here because I know so many people who absolutely loved this book to pieces. So, regardless of whether or not I thought it was a little overhyped, it's not really important here. The fact of the matter is, people really, really like this book, and I would be remiss if I didn't recommend it to everyone else. This is about Maddie and Theo, and they are both mutual friends through Alexa, who was the heroine of the first book of this series, and it's now her wedding. She wants both Maddie and Theo in the wedding, so they're gonna have to be forced proximity relationship. Mind you, Maddie and Theo don't like each other. They've never gotten along. However, they can't seem to stop doing it with each other. So it's one of those situations, and kind of hiding their relationship from everybody because they don't want people to know about it. But they also can't stop touching each other in their private zones. So it's one of those type of situations, and it's a lot of kind of like trying to hide it. I don't know if it's successful or not, but those type of situations. So it's one of those fun kind of enemies to lovers, rom-com-y, fake dating a little bit type situations, and a lot of people really genuinely love this book, so I do want to recommend it. I have to recommend the 5th season by N.K. Jemison. I don't know what genre. I think it's sci-fi, I would say. It's definitely sci-fi, but also kind of post-apocalyptic type of story, and maybe even a dash of dystopian. Let's throw that in there, why not? A dash. And it's really hard to describe the plot, because it's so uniquely written that it's difficult. It's written in second person at times, and second person is the you pronoun, so basically they're talking to you, like you are sitting on the floor and you are sad. So it's very jarring, because you don't get a lot of books like that. But also the world that is created here is so vivid and just bananas creative. Like, it's not something I ever would have come up with, and like the way that she describes this world and the people in it and like their abilities is so like completely unique and different from anything else I've ever read. I will say though, the writing, like, I don't feel like I'm smart enough. Essentially, like, you're reading it and you're like, gosh, this is brilliant. It's literally a masterpiece. It's brilliant. It's so brilliant that I don't think I'm smart enough to understand what's going on completely, but I know it's brilliant. It's one of those situations where it's so good that I can't even comprehend it, really, but it's really, really, really good, and is legit, I would consider a masterpiece of sci-fi literature. It is frankly phenomenal, and also second person is very jarring, but you kind of get into it after a while, and it's multiple time periods, and they all kind of come together at the end. And this world is very post-apocalyptic, and it's dying, and there are all these different types of like people with abilities and stuff, and how they are kind of basically either hated and murdered, or they are kind of forced into service. It's kind of slavery, essentially. So it's a very interesting world she has built, and it's so creative, and it's so like unique, and I've never really read another book quite like this one. So masterpiece of sci-fi literature. I definitely recommend this one. I also want to recommend Kingdom of Souls by Rena Barron. This one I genuinely really, really love, especially if you're a fan of like Children of Blood and Bone. You're gonna love this one. It's kind of a similar type of world. They have Orisha and witches and witch doctors, and so that's kind of where the similarities end, really, because they have similar West African tradition mixed in. But in this one, the magic is very dangerous because it has a cost. There are people who magic comes to willingly, and that's great. They can wield magic. What about people who don't have magic come to them willingly? They have to sacrifice things, or there's a cost to get this magic. And the cost is not something you want to pay all the time. Sometimes, hey, you're gonna have to lose a tooth. Hey, sometimes 10 years of your life are gonna come off right now to get this magic. It's definitely a dangerous magical system, and the world this is created in is so rich and lush and like detailed that I really, really love the world building here. And we're following Ara, who is born to a family of powerful witch doctors. However, she is not having magic come to her willingly. It doesn't want to come to her for reasons I can't get into. But so she has to be willing to sacrifice things to get magic in order to save like literally the world from a giant ass demon. So there's some shit going down here, but honestly, it's really good, underhyped, completely underrated, so good. I wish this got like a lot more like hype around it because it's legitimately fantastic. It's so lushly written, and I can't recommend it enough. It's great. Also, I want to recommend War Girls by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is a retelling of the Biafran War, which was a real thing that happened, I believe, late 60s, early 70s. And it happened in Nigeria. Basically, there were the Igbo people. They were, you know, shit on by everyone. And they're like, you know what? Fuck all y'all. We're Biafra now. We don't want to be Nigeria no more. And Nigeria was like, no. Excuse me. We're going to war now. So that's like a very brief summary of what the war kind of was about. And this one takes that same war story and puts it into a very much in the future sci-fi story. So now they're retelling the Biafran War from the perspective of, you know, a futuristic society where there's like robots and cybernetic limbs that people can have. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting take on a retelling. We're following two sisters in particular, Onyi and Ifi, and they really do want to see the war come to an end, but the fact of the matter is, this is a war story. So it's really difficult to pick a side here because I feel like Tochi Onyebuchi does a good job of not necessarily picking a side. Both the Nigerian side and the Biafran side are both committing atrocities against each other. The Nigerians just have more materials and financial stability in order to commit bigger atrocities. So it doesn't change the fact that both sides are doing evil things and both sides are doing good things. So it's not really one side is being vilified over the other. It's a matter of perspective. And these two sisters are on like different sides of it, and how are they going to reconcile the relationship? And it's a very dark book. There's child soldiers in it. You know, people are getting like blown up and they have like cybernetic limbs because they lost limbs, you know? It is kind of very dark and very bloody and gory and violent, and it's a war story, but it's very interesting and fertile ground for character study because neither side is made out to be a clear, you know, hero in these circumstances. Like, both sides are equally awful to each other. In a war, it doesn't matter which side's right, both sides are going to commit atrocities against each other. So that's kind of where we're getting at here. And honestly, it's beautifully written. It's a little overly long, and it could have been a bit more inwardly focused. It's a bit more outwardly focused than I would have liked, but other than that, like, honestly, it's great. It's really interesting, it's thought-provoking, and it's actually telling a story that really happened, but putting it through a sci-fi lens. Also, I want to recommend A River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy, and this one is kind of, like, fantastic just from a world-building perspective. This is again about sisters, Eva and Issa, and in this world, basically, they have rival heirs. So in it, if there's two daughters born to a queen, those two daughters have to fight to the death, basically, and one of them's the heir. It's a rough world. So there's like 4 different kinds of races in this world. You have humans with magic, or without magic. I think there's some people who don't have magic as well. And then there's bloodkin, which are basically kind of vampires. You have fae, which are fae, and you have chimera. And chimera, they're kind of like the vilified race because they're chimera, you know, so they're humans, but they have animal characteristics. Like one of them might have like ram horns or a tail or something. I don't know. They have animal parts. And what makes this world so fascinating is that homophobia and racism are not part of it. And the people in this world are all kinds of colors. There's brown people, there's white people, there's freaking blue people. Like, it doesn't matter. That's not an issue to anybody. Everyone's just like different races. Like, you know, there's like vampires, fays, chimera, and humans. But they can be any color, no one cares. Also, people are just casually queer in here. You know, there's no issue about having to come out or having to be accepted. It's just like, yeah, sometimes boys kiss boys, whatever, you know? So it was really interesting seeing a world where those things just don't exist in it. And it's fascinating to see a world where those aren't the main point of the story. The main point of the story is like something completely different. It's magic and finding your birthright and, you know, rival heirs fighting to the death for a crown. So it's got a lot of really interesting world building things going on here. And I was endlessly fascinated with the world that was created. Casually queer. There's no racism. It's just like a wonderful, like, diverse world without making it like, ooh, look at how diverse we are. It was just like, yeah, this is just how it is. So that was really fascinating, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I recommend it. It's really good. It's a really fun YA fantasy story. I definitely wouldn't say it's a crossover novel. It's definitely YA fantasy, but pretty fun. I really enjoyed it. The last recommendation is On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. In this one, we're following Bree. She is a 16-year-old girl who is very much having a hard time. She's in poverty, and she dreams of being a rapper because her father was a rapper who was kind of like underground legend, and he was murdered when she was a young girl. So she's had a rough life, and she's trying her best to make her way in the world, and her perspective is much different than Star's perspective. For example, in The Hate U Give, Star is basically like always good and has the fighting for right, and she's basically the hero of that story. Bree is a much more complex character. She is, yes, she's the hero of the story, but the fact of the matter is she's not as squeaky clean as Star is. She's much more, she makes messier choices than Star does. So I find her to be a much more fascinating, interesting heroine, and I really liked her story. There are some moments in here that are just absolutely heartbreaking, and the way that they're written, they just let it set. It's like there wouldn't be any music playing over the scene if it was a movie, for example. They just let it be silent, and that emotional resonance like hits, and you're like, ooh, oh, that's rough. So it's just much more of a dynamic character. I really enjoyed this one, and I do recommend. It's it's a character doesn't always make the best choices, but in the end she learns from her mistakes. So what more can you really want from a heroine? So those are just a few recommendations for Black History Month. It is so important to read from authors who have a completely different background than you do. It's important to read diversely, and I hope you guys agree with that. If you're looking for a book to read diversely, I hope some of these recommendations were perfect for you and you found one that you really want to read and enjoy. Let me know in a comment down below. Have you read any of these books? And if so, which one's your favorites, your least favorites? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you like this video, make sure you give it a like. And if you want to see more videos, make sure you subscribe. And I'll see you guys soon. Bye!